now face to face, so they would make use of this opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. I agree. Yeah, so yeah, it's recording now. So okay, from here on out, nothing embarrassing there, Kev.
I get 10 cents every time this is viewed on YouTube, right?
That's right.
Oh, come on, we can embarrass him. How are you,
Yes,
Dan?
we can. Hey, pretty good. Doing great. Glad to see. I invited some alumni and everybody else too, and so you're gonna have to actually really shape up here, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at the initials and see who's down there.
Well, we got Sean's an alumni, and let's see, who else do we have?
Hey, Sean.
Yep.
Hey, Samia, how you doing?
Doing very good.
I guess that's it, and Scott. So yeah, should have sent it to the board of or the advisory board too. Some of them might have wanted to jump in. Once they hear about Kevin Bishop coming in, they're going to want to hear what's happening.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Oh, we just want to give him a hard time. That's all.
Well, for sure. Of course, we got to do that. Sean, you don't look like you've changed your face at all. I was hoping your wife had gotten worked on you there, but it still hasn't happened.
No, not at all. Come on now. Good luck with that. You know how stubborn I am.
Yep. Well, Katie, go ahead and let's jump in and introduce Kevin, and we'll go from there. And whatever other club business you want to do too, that'd be great.
Okay, awesome. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we'd like to see you though, just for a second, if we can.
Yeah, I'm having issues. I'm trying to unclick it and it's just not working. Let me know if it works, okay? Or I'm just gonna keep on clicking it. But you can hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead. You're fine. Just go ahead and jump in. You're good.
Okay, well, I just want to welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here today for the first semester. For the club business, I just want to ask you guys to join the club. It's $20 and you'll get a t-shirt. Message me if you want to come pick it up, your t-shirt. Also, we have our Facebook site, so you can join that and just check up on all the events and updates that are posted. And that's also where we actually sell and trade textbooks. So if you want a good deal, you should check it out. And the UCLS conference is coming up in February. They have asked for a couple volunteers from the club members. So if you are interested, you can volunteer and you get free membership for the conference. So that's pretty cool. Is there anything else that I should talk about, Dan?
Not that I can think of. Sometimes I just want to mention on the volunteer thing, sometimes we'll get 2, 3, or 4 of you together and you can sort of carpool down on your own and save some money on that. And, a place to stay, that kind of thing can always help too. Because the conference is free. It's a real good benefit. Plus, it's a really good place for our students to sort of rub shoulders with a lot of the professionals that are there. Almost everybody at the conference is licensed. Like 85% of the attendees are licensed. So it gives you a chance to really talk with a lot of people. So I'd encourage, I think, what did Susan say? She probably needs 3 or 4, I would imagine, Katie?
Yeah, that's what she said.
Yeah, so please do that. We've had a good reputation of 3 or 4 students from our college show up there. So that would be great to have good representation. I can't go at all. We're not allowed to travel right now, so I won't be able to even attend the conference. But you guys can. So.
Hey, Dan.
That'd be great.
Can I add on to that real quick?
Yeah, Sean, go ahead. That'd be great.
So I've been going down. Well, I'm not going down this year, but I think 4 years now. And like Dan was saying, you get to meet a lot of professionals. Me moving in from another state and coming into the program, that's how I started to get to know people. Kevin, who I work with now, I don't know how many, well, actually, I think everyone here should know Mike, right? Nadu, who I've now, let's see, gosh, he's put up with me for 4 years now. But every student that has gone down there within 3 months, I think was the longest I saw, has gotten a job somewhere in the profession from various companies around here. And even with the BLM or some of the other federal agencies too. So if you can go, do it. It would be worth your while, and you have to put your face out there and be willing to talk. You know, Kevin, I've seen from day one, he goes up to the students and stuff like that, and he'll talk with you, and he'll be more than willing to help introduce you to people and stuff like that. Like, go out on your own, do it, and I'm telling you, you will get a job. I've not seen one person yet who hasn't.
Thank you, Sean, for that endorsement. And Sean's a former graduate of the program, and I invited all the alumni to come to these lecture series as well. So thank you, Sean, for chiming in there. That's all I had, though, Katie.
Okay, awesome. If you have any questions, just email me or Dan, and let's get started. So I'm going to introduce Kevin Bishop. Kevin Bishop began surveying in 2001. The small firm he worked for primarily focused on mining claim retracements, PLSS rectangular survey retracements, large farm and ranch properties, and boundary conflict resolution surveys. He received a degree from UVU and received his survey degree from SLCC. He purchased a small survey company in 2009 and has been a business owner for the past 11 years. He became licensed in the state of Utah in 2007 and became a certified federal surveyor in 2012. Kevin has been a member of the UCLS board and an adjunct instructor at UVU off and on since 2009. He is happily married and has 3 wonderful children. Okay, we're glad to have you, and I'll turn the time over to you, Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So when Dan talked to me about the topic here, boundary surveys of the worst kind, I wasn't sure exactly where to go or how to take that. I didn't know if he meant that how to avoid you know, some of the most troublesome surveys that we get into, or maybe how to avoid boundary surveys, or maybe he's looked at some of my work and thought I had some really bad boundary surveys and could benefit from doing some research on the topic. So what Dan clarified was we want to talk a little bit about surveying's best practices and how to avoid boundary surveys of the worst kind. Now, I can't see anyone's hands, but I'm assuming the large majority of you work for or employed or have worked for a survey engineering firm. Would that be correct? So everyone here has probably seen, there you go, I see a hand or two raised, yeah. So everyone's seen boundary work of their own firms, and they've also done research and pulled up survey work from other firms. And everyone's probably seen some plats that were really good and some plats that were really bad. So I'm going to cover a few things, maybe some industry best practices, and talk about what surveyors do to get in trouble and how we can avoid getting in trouble, what makes for a bad survey or a survey of the worst kind, and what would qualify as a survey of the best kind or of the highest quality. And obviously we want to be involved in projects that are good and high quality survey projects. So one of the things we can do is to get involved with some industry best standards. And hopefully everyone's seen this. Can everybody see my screen? The UCLS standards of practice for boundary surveys. So we have, yes, the Utah Council of Land Surveyors has a document for the best practices. This is not state law. This is the best practices by the governing body for surveying in the state of Utah. We should probably be familiar with this, and it does reference state law as far as filing plats, our legal requirements to be licensed in the state. There's Utah code. It talks about procedures and definitions. The first thing I think as surveyors we need to do is we need to be aware of what the code is or what the law is, what we can and cannot do, what we should and should not do, what we're required to do, and how to act in a professional manner. NCEES, hopefully some of you are studying for or already passed their 2 tests. They've got a model law, and Utah incorporates the NCEES model law as part of the Utah State Code. And they specifically have sections in the model law for surveyors, what the proper terms and definitions are. And the state of Utah incorporates this into all of their licensure act, all of their disciplinary acts. This is what they reference for what a professional surveyor should be. So I think that's one of the first things we need to do as surveyors is get an understanding of what the law is, what's expected of us. When we sit for the test, when we get licensed, once we're licensed and we're surveyors, what's expected of us as far as being professionals? What are the industry best practices? In the last week, I sat down with a couple of surveyors, went to lunch and talked to a few on the phone and asked them, what are some areas where surveyors get into trouble? One of them worked for a city and reviews lots of survey plats, subdivisions, annexations. One worked for the county and again, sees lots of different firms and different companies that come in. They both had some of the same responses. Part of that dealt with quality control. So we have our industry best practices, UCLS or NCEES, but then there's also some personal best practices that I think every surveyor should incorporate, should use when they go to the field, when they do research, when they do drafting, as far as communicating with other professionals. And obviously there's some gray area or areas of interpretation depending on what you're going to do, but there's clearly some right and wrong things to do in some of those. So if any of you have questions or examples, go ahead and unmute and let's talk about that. But I wanted to bring up one of the things that these other surveyors I talked to specifically said, we have a huge problem with surveys, subdivisions, annexation plats when they come in. They come in and there's problems with their basis of bearing that's on a subdivision plat. Now, this is one that I just pulled off something, a description that's here. And you can see they clearly state what the basis of bearing is on this document that I pulled off. It's along the section line between a couple of different corners. That's a good basis of bearing. This is one that's on a subdivision plat. Obviously, you can see the date, 1975. We did things different 40 years ago. This basis of bearing just says Utah State Plane Coordinate System Central Zone. We can do better than that as an industry. We can be very specific with what the basis of bearing was, what's the bearing, even the datum or the coordinate system we used, the monuments. We need to be very good with our basis of bearing. We need to be very good with our basis of bearing. Now, interesting, when I talked to the city guy and the county guy, they said, both of them, we don't want to get too involved in telling surveyors if they're right or if they're wrong. There's a minimum standard for quality for the state, that you have to have a north arrow and you have to have a basis of bearing. It doesn't say your basis of bearing has to be good, and it doesn't say where you have to display it. It doesn't say how much detail it has to be. But those are examples of maybe one that's good and one that's a little better. And I know that the one was 1975, but we've probably all seen some surveys or examples that are kind of like that. One of the others that they said was the picture, the actual plat, the map differs from the written legal description. They should be the same. There's a distance or a bearing that got altered and they're not in agreement. And an interesting comment they said is generally it's the map that's correct and it's the written legal description that has an error. Those need to be the same. So there's some good quality control. I have found in my own work that it's generally not enough for me to review my own plats. They need to be seen by someone else's eyes. And the more tricky they are, the more convoluted they are, the more I need someone else. It doesn't have to be a surveyor. It could be my wife. It could be anybody, but someone else needs to read it, go through the plat, highlight a misspelled word, double check a bearing. We need good quality control. That's some of the drafting work that I think surveyors can do to avoid those worst case scenarios. Sometimes, in fact, I talked to my brother about this. Some of you may know Scotty, he's here. And he said, oh, surveys are the worst kind. There's some surveys that are just terrible. I don't know what you do. And we talked about a couple of examples of projects or areas that are just really bad or tricky, or no matter what you do, it's not right. I said, no, that's really not actually the topic. I want to go on a different avenue, but that's kind of a good introduction. Sometimes there are surveys that are just troublesome and you're not sure what you want to do. And the other guy in your office thinks you ought to go a different way, but the landowner is telling you something and you've got conflicting evidence between a fence line or a found rebar, maybe a deed. Maybe there was a survey done 12 years ago on the neighbor's property and you just can't make them all agree. This is a key area and element on every record of survey plat. There should be an area dedicated to the surveyor's notes or a narrative. And I believe in state code, it's actually mentioned that every plat should have a narrative. Again, they don't necessarily say what should be in that narrative or how you should describe it. The narrative could be the purpose of the survey is to identify the John Doe property. We were hired to set stakes in the corners. We did the work in January of 2021. That could be your narrative. That's not a real good narrative, but it could be the narrative. We ought to include maybe the warranty deed or quitclaim deed that we used. If there was a boundary line agreement involved, if there was an annexation involved, if we have different basis of bearing or rotations, we should include that. We should include maybe the types of monuments that we found or we used. The controlling monuments, were they GLO brass caps, Utah County brass caps? Were they in a ring and a lid? Was there a rotation involved? All of that should be included in the narrative. And interestingly enough, the narrative is not really written for the benefit of the landowner or your client. The narrative is written to another professional surveyor to explain what you did, why you did it, what took place. And in some cases, it's written to a future you, so that in 8 years, when that survey pops up again, you can read the narrative and you know what you did and why you did it. In some cases, the narrative can be really simple. It's a lot in the subdivision. It matches the intersection and cul-de-sac monuments. There's plugs in the curb. There's just not a lot to say. Just it fit perfectly. It just worked. Other cases, there might need to be a little more explanation about a bad tie. The section or subdivision was tied to the 16th or the center quarter, and everything had to be adjusted to fit long-standing improvement. Maybe you found rebar and cap in the ground and you had to accept one, or why didn't you accept the rebar and cap that you found? All of that needs to somehow be included in that narrative. If you're wondering how to explain what you did, someone else is going to wonder the same thing. So one of the best practices is to explain, give the details, give them the vesting documents, everything, put it in there. And if there's over explanation or something else, you need to keep notes for yourself in your field book somehow of what you did, how you did it, why you did it, when you did it, who was there, how you made that determination. So your narrative is important. Now, this is where I want to ask for a few comments. What, if anybody has an idea, what would qualify as a good survey and what would qualify as a bad survey? Give me an example or an item that would fit in one of those two categories. Yeah, go ahead.
Things just clearly not matching in the field. Maybe some evidence that is they talk about in the narrative but doesn't actually exist in the field. I guess just discrepancies. Maybe they describe a fence that doesn't exist, or they, all sorts of different discrepancies between what's written and what's in the field.
Okay. So yeah, there are some inaccuracies, and some of those, the only way you would know about that is to actually make a trip to the field and find out that the house or the address or the fence they talked about doesn't exist or isn't in the right location, doesn't match their narrative. Okay, thanks. Anyone else have an idea?
I would say that either having a bad calibration might set you off, because what we're trying to do is recreate previous surveys or make it so other people can recreate ours. So if you start off with a bad calibration or don't have the right information in the first place, that would also be not good for everybody trying to recreate your survey.
Okay, very good. No, get familiar with your equipment and know what's going on. One of the other concerns that a couple other surveyors brought up was ground to grid or a scale factor and how we use that. Go ahead. Who else has a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say maybe working a survey without all the pertinent information, history of the property, title chain and all that kind of information that will help you put that picture together properly.
Okay, so not doing enough research before you ever get out to the ground, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And there's, right, one thing that we've got to include with surveys, obviously, when we do something, there's an underlying cost. We're all in business to make some money, right? One of the biggest problems is letting cost or price dictate quality. I remember an old surveyor years ago, probably at the St. George conference before I was licensed, and it was some old surveyor that's probably retired or dead now. And he said, when it comes to surveys, you can have them fast, accurate, or cheap, but you can only pick two of those three. And unfortunately, sometimes we pick the fast and cheap instead of the accurate, right? It's hard to get those. So if we don't do enough work, if we didn't do the research, we should always take one more step. If you've got a deed, did you go back to the deed before that and make sure they agree? And did you go to the deed before that and make sure they agreed? Did one of the old deeds used to call to a fence and to a ditch, and the new deeds drop that out? That could answer some questions for you. Title generally goes back 40 years. What if the last deed was 2002 and the deed before that was 1971? They don't have to pull that 1971 deed, but you might want to if there's some real questions. You always ask your client one more question. Always ask the title company, the attorney, one more question. Be very clear on what it is they want you to do, where you're going to go. It's worth it. Does anyone else have some comments? What would qualify as a good survey? Yeah, go ahead.
Having a lot of objects that you're actually tied to, not just like 2 or 3, go the extra mile and have maybe 4 or 5 items that you actually tie it to, so you can actually have a good ground point to start from.
Okay. Having good quality control, So it's a right 3 found rebar, 2 section corners, a street monument, something that makes it easier to retrace. That's good. Anyone else have a thought? Yeah, go ahead.
I think a big thing is to have a strong narrative that really shows what you did, and to, I guess, just be thorough in the work you've done.
Okay. Right. Strong narrative, explain it, give all the information you've got. All of that works. So there's a difference between having a good survey and having a good survey plat, or a bad survey and a bad survey plat. It is possible to have a good survey, but to have a bad plat. It's probably possible to have a good plat, but a bad survey. Just because the plat looks really neat or fancy doesn't necessarily mean that the survey was of high quality. And just because the survey plat looks a little old school or rough around the edges or not as high quality doesn't mean the survey in the field was bad. Ideally, we want both. We want a good looking plat, a good looking product, and we want the quality of work to be high caliber as well. Now, when you go buy a new car or you spend $3,000 to buy a new computer, you have something to show for it. It's a great computer. It's a brand new car. It's a new stereo. It's a new rifle. Whatever you've got, you have something to show. When you spend money for a survey, and they can be the same price as a computer, you can get an $1,800 survey. You can get a $4,500 survey. If you're talking an Alta survey, you can get a $10,000 or $15,000 survey. Sometimes the only thing we have to show our client is a piece of paper. Although it's a large one, 24 by 36, sometimes it's 2 or 3 sheets, but ultimately that's what we give our clients when we send them a bill for $3,500. So we want that to look the very best. We also want them to understand what we did on the ground and answer their questions. So the next thing I want to talk about is communication. And surveying is like most everything else in the world. If there's a problem between a student and a teacher, between a husband and a wife, between parents and children, between 2 coworkers, between 2 different political parties, not necessarily in our country, but somewhere else that might happen, it's generally because of poor communication. When we get called to do a survey, I've kind of thought of a couple different reasons that a client, a landowner, might engage the services of a surveyor. The first one would be because they have specific questions and they want to do something. They're trying to build a fence and they need some answers before they go any further. They want to pour concrete for a driveway or a patio, put in a hot tub, and they're not quite sure what they own before they cut down a tree or pour it. So they want you to set some marks on the ground. They need to run a string line and they need to know what it is, and that's why they've hired you. The second would be there's a conflict and they're fighting with a neighbor. Something's gone wrong. A neighbor's already cut down a tree or done something, and they want you to be the voice of reason and explain the conflict and show what's going on. A third might be this landowner doesn't really care what you do, and they're not going to go look for any corners. They've called you because the city told them they have to, or their realtor or title company told them they have to, or they're trying to buy some ground and their lender or bank told them they need a survey or an Alta survey or something, and they're just trying to meet that qualifications and check the box, and they're not really even sure what terms to use or what to ask for. They don't know the difference between topo and site plan and boundary, and they talk hubs and stakes and corners and monuments, and they don't really know what's out there. They're looking at a bigger picture, and you're just a check box on the list of things to get done. We need to discern which one of those it is and what is their real question and what they really hired you for. And that's the job we need to do, with the understanding that we might have to educate them along the way of what surveyors really are and what we do and don't do and what our limits are and what the standards are that we should do. We can't just go throw 2 stakes in the ground and charge someone $25. We've got to file a plat and create a plat and file it with the county and put it on record. And we can't just go run a little magic wand like we're locating utilities and spray paint some lines on the ground and say, build your fence here. Sometimes there's some public education involved. And that is a lot of your job, is to educate the public on proper terminology and phrases and the legal aspect of our surveying profession. Has anyone ever had to engage in that and educate the public? Maybe that was a title company or attorney, as far as what an ALTA survey is or is not, or what boundary surveys are, or we cannot do that. That's an engineer that has to do that. Has anyone ever been involved in something like that? Yeah, go ahead.
I've had people walk up to me, countless times and ask what's going on. They're always concerned when they see me out there. But the most recent example was this guy who he was under the impression that I was going to be on his property to topo like a specific portion where the company that I work for was going to have an easement for a sewer line, and I was getting more than that. So I was on a part of his property that he wasn't expecting. So he came over and he was really frustrated because he'd been in a deal with the county about this for a while. He's like, why do you need to be over here? So I just had to explain to him that the reason that we come out here is so if things change, we don't have to make a return visit. We usually try and get more than we need to the first time to make sure we don't have to do a return visit. That they're in communication with you and they've set expectations with you that you can rely on. So just trying to explain that calmly and de-escalate the situation basically.
Okay, that's a great point. Has anyone ever been out doing some work, walking along a curb and a gutter or fence, and had a neighbor come out and say, hey, as long as you're here, can I pay to throw in that south corner of my property where we want to build a fence? We're not sure where it is. Maybe I'll give you $100. You can just throw that in. Go ahead. You have a comment?
Oh no, it happens all the time when you're out in the field. Especially when you're doing right-of-way work, which we do a lot of and stuff like that. So as soon as they see you, people know something, what you're in the area, what you're doing, and they either want something from you, like, hey, where's my property line out? Can you tell me where this is at real quick? Or, or just whatever. And the best advice I've given people that have worked under me is you got to play stupid. There's no other way around it. You just got to say, look, I'm just here to do this job. I don't even know what the end result is. They just send me out here with a map and I just go topo it. Sorry.
Okay. Jacob, you have a comment or question?
I had an experience where I went to do a block survey and somebody else on the block that saw me out there said, hey, I've been fighting with my neighbor about my property line. Can you tell me where my property line is? And I'm like, well, you can hire me out and we can give you a survey and these things. But she wanted to know exactly where her property was. So she knew that she was right. Because her and her neighbor have been fighting for, I guess, ever since they've been neighbors about the property line.
Okay, so did you end up picking up another job?
She never hired us. I don't think she could afford it. But we did prepare it and we had it ready for her, but she didn't ever follow through with what she needed to do on her end to officially hire us.
Okay, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Okay, who else had a comment or their hand up?
Yeah, this is Tanner.
Okay.
I was just working on a boundary survey today, and I was shooting the curb and gutter, and a guy pulled up and said, like, I'll give you $200 cash if you can just go put in this one corner on my property up the road. It's that house. Like, I have an old record of survey. I know you have all the points and everything. I'll pay you $200 just like in cash right now. They're like, oh, you know, there's a lot more to it. It's a lot of liability. You have to do research. You have to fill out, you know, file a record of survey. He's like, well, they've all been telling me like the minimum they can do is like $1,500, and that's just outrageous. And really kind of had to explain to him, you know, why even 1,500 is pretty low for a, you know, a boundary survey, and how much other work goes into it. Can't just go run over there and magically drop a point into his curb where his boundary is.
So a good part of our job is going to be dealing with the public, whether or not that's the next door neighbor or your client, whoever, you know, the city surveyor, city engineer, attorney. But a good part of our job is going to be dealing with the public. If we're good, we can pick up those jobs. There's nothing wrong with having someone pull up and ask you if you can do theirs. You might have to explain what it's going to cost and that you can't do it today. You might have to come back in 2 weeks, but you can get those. Sometimes on that block survey, when you do a city block in Provo or Payson or Spanish Fork, by the time you've done your little teeny lot, you know where every corner in that whole block is supposed to go. So you can go back and do a couple of those, and that's great. But sometimes part of it is taking the time out of your day to explain to the public what it means to file a record of survey, what it means to set a monument, what a plat is, how much research you have to do, what about the liability involved, what are the legal aspects because you're a license holder in the state of Utah. Sometimes we have to explain to the public what all of this means, and when we don't just pay some monthly fees to tap into a nationwide database that has everyone's property corners and they're all plugged in. We have to get a deed, do the research, get the neighbor's deed, look for a boundary line agreement, check right of ways. We've got to find all of that out so that we can stand behind the work that we did. If we do that, we can pick the job up and we can do it and make some profit, hopefully, and pay for a McDonald's 2 for $5 Big Mac or something. But we have to be honest with the public and educate them what our jobs are to be. Sometimes the public is a city official or a title company when they ask us to do something that we don't feel comfortable with, or is not in our scope of work, or is outside our project areas. It's okay to say no. One of the other things that got brought up was sometimes surveyors, in not wanting to tell the public no, in chasing the dollar and not wanting to lose a client, they take on a project that might be outside their area of expertise or a little too big for them. They're licensed to do it, and that's fine, but maybe it's something that they're just is a little outside their realm, or they make some promises that are a little bigger than what they can keep, and they find out they're under the gun, and they've rushed it, and they've done a few things and didn't dot their I's and cross their T's and didn't do the research, and later on we find out that we're in some trouble. So one survey that that I had a problem with years ago, I ran into a record of survey that was on file, and I couldn't find the rebar and cap on the ground. Just couldn't find them. I called the surveyor, talked to him. We went back and forth a little bit. I went out. It was a big survey. There was over 20 points. I went to like 16 of them and found nothing. And there were some problems with the survey. Well, he and I met at his client's office with my client there, and we just sat and talked about it. And he said, I have never been to the property. I had one of my crews and some guys that worked for us went out there and did it. I've never been to the property, and maybe we just didn't set those corners. That's how the first 10 minutes of that meeting started. So as you go through your careers, you may find that as a licensed surveyor, you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 6 or 12 people working underneath your licensure, and you're going to sign and stamp and review their plats. and you're on the hook for everything that happens. We want the office work to be good, and we want the field work to be good. And if no one can find a monument in the ground, it makes it really hard to retrace. And if no one can read our plat and decipher what we did, they're left to only find what was on the ground. So we're hoping that both of those are lining up in harmony and very good. Let's talk about some best practices out in the field. When we go out and gather data, right? Obviously, the number one concern is safety, right? So you wear an orange vest, you try to set your tripod up out of the way, but let's not talk too much on safety, but some best practices for the field. One of you, it might have been Tana that talked earlier, right? You always go a little further. You pick everything up. You don't want to have to go back to the job, especially if you got permission to be on private property, the neighbor's property, through a locked gate. You don't want to get back to your office and realize that you forgot to locate a tree or a water meter or whatever else it is, right? So an extra 20 or 30 minutes in the field could save you hours in the office, or a trip back to the field. If your survey happens to be across the street from your office, that's a no-brainer. But what if your survey's in Tooele or Bountiful or Price? We don't want to have to go back to that job. So when you do your research and you're ready to go to the field, it's always nice to know, what do they say? Attorneys never ask a question that you don't already know the answer to. As surveyors, we should never want to go to the ground unless we already know what we're expecting to find. Are you hoping that there's a rebar and cap in that fence corner because you got the record of survey and you know it should be there? It was done 8 years ago. Do you have a metal detector in your car? Do you have a shovel in your car? Did you get the neighbor's deed? Did they both call to the fence line? Does one of them call to the ditch? When you go to the field, you should be going to verify what you've looked at in the office already, and hoping that you're going to find some additional data. It's a lot easier to do office work than it is to do the field work. So when we go to the field, it's always worthwhile to take that one more step, get that one more point, locate that fence corner, look for that rebar, get one more section corner, drive around the block, look for the street monument, get the curb plug. Let's make sure we've got enough data that if this doesn't line up perfectly, we can figure out the rotation or the adjustment. Sometimes when you're dealing with a record of survey, you'll find that 3 different surveys have 3 different bases of bearing, and you've got to find the one that your project is and rotate the other 2 so that they can all be harmonious along the street or in the block. Sometimes that happens when you're doing a lot of record and you're bordering a recorded subdivision. Sometimes it happens when you're bordering a UDOT road and there was some taking or widening involved, and the basis of bearing, they don't match up. When you're doing something that's in the old lot and block system and right next to it is outside the lot and block system, lot and blocks are generally calling north, south, east, and west, and outside of them are running on some bearing. We need to know what that is, and it's worth your while to take a little bit of extra time and locate curb and gutter or sidewalk or water meters or whatever it is to get it while it's in the field. And speaking of field data, there's no industry standard, there's no state standard, but hopefully when you're looking at someone's data and you see TBC, everybody has this idea that that's top back of curb. We kind of know that. That's almost an unwritten standard of how we locate curb. But is there a standard for what we call for a water meter or sidewalk or transformers or trees or houses? We should probably be on the same page with at least the other people in our office. There should be a standard somehow that when that goes out, and it's okay to ask a question. How do you want this taken? What do you want it stored as? What can we do? If any of you are doing a field to finish and you're importing it and doing your line work, you have to have it set up that way. If you're just doing boundary work and locating things, it's nice that you know what your company does, your boss does. It's ideally, it's kind of nice to be on a similar pattern. UDOT has a very set code that they establish, and this is what you will do if you're doing UDOT work when you submit all your plans. Sometimes excavators will tell you how to mark your offsets. We just do 10-foot offsets. If the excavator says 11, well, let's go ahead and do 11. We're doing it for him. If he wants it circled or underlined, there's a standard and we do it. But again, there's kind of that communication of who are we doing it for and what are we trying to satisfy. So when a client specifically asks us to set a point on line every 100 feet, we need to communicate with the client and make them understand that. In fact, my brother was with me on this one. We did a little project and the landowner, for some reason, thought that the lath was their property corner, not realizing that at the base of the lath was actually a rebar with a cap on it that was the corner. And the landowner thought if he pulled out the lath, he could move the lath 3 or 4 or 5 feet and just put it back in the ground again. And that was his corner. That didn't go very well. They didn't understand that that was not the corner. It wasn't even the monument. And then they didn't know they should have been looking for something else. But we have got to educate the public and communicate with them about what we're doing in the field and what goes on. So let's see if I can share this again real quick. So we've got the UCLS standards that we talked about. When we estimate cost and time, right? As far as I can think of, surveys are billed based on 3 things. It's the amount of time it's going to take. It's the liability we're going to incur, and it's the expertise that they're requiring us to have. So doing an ALTA survey of 20 acres with 6 buildings is probably more expensive than doing a 1 acre vacant lot. Doing it right, but that's how do you estimate your time and your cost? We need to communicate very well with the public of what we have. So we've got the NCS model law. When we talk about checklists and standards, Utah County has a checklist about what should be on a survey plat that gets filed. Provo City has one for subdivisions, and so does Springville and Lehigh and American Fork. Generally, they are similar. A few different nuances as far as, is it just the mayor that signs or is it the whole city council? But by and large, they're really the same. If we have good practices in place, we are going to meet all these anyway. When you look at these, they're going to say that it has to be drawn to scale, an accurate legal description, the name of the development. Some of them start off with a north arrow and a bar scale. Where's the Utah County one? That, right, your seal's required. You've got to have a date on it. Well, all of that should be on just a typical survey that gets filed, and we should have that on a template. I always put the bar scale next to the north arrow. I don't know why they're separate or different, but again, it's the best practices that we found repeatedly over and over and over that work for us. One of the things that we don't want, everybody see that? That is a GLO monument section corner with a private rebar and cap 8 inches away. Those get really hard, and the plat might be a fantastic plat. It might have won some awards at the UCLS plat competition for how great it is. In the field, are we going to go with the section corner that's been here for 108 years? Are we going to go with the rebar and cap that's been here for 6 years? This is ideally what we're hoping to avoid. We want to answer questions for the public, not create new ones that they're going to ask. We want to eliminate confusion, not start and encourage confusion. So we want to have some best practices that are out there. That one's even a little bit tighter. I don't know which was there first. I don't know which came second. Maybe they're both actually from the same surveyor that did the same survey a couple years apart and didn't find a zone. I don't know, but I think as a professionals, we can do better than this. And some of this is going to come down to surveying best practices and how to avoid those surveys of the worst kind. This right here is probably bringing up questions that the landowners never ever had before. And this certainly does not instill confidence in surveyors to resolve conflict and answer questions. So what are we giving to the public as far as our profession, and what are we putting out there to other professionals? Now, speaking of other professionals, we need to cooperate and work with other professionals. We deal with the county recorder, the county surveyors, we deal with city surveyors, attorneys, engineers, public work directors, and we're going to deal with other professional surveyors. There's plenty of work for all of us out there. We can all get along, we can all be friends, and by and large, surveyors do a really good job of cooperating. But we can do a better job when it comes to trying to help another surveyor out in the future by giving a good narrative, by setting good corners, by referencing good control, having a tight basis of bearing, being willing to send someone a plat because you forgot to file it, being willing to share information, being willing to meet at someone's office and let's discuss this problem before you set this one and I set this one and I tell my client that you're an idiot and you tell your client that I'm an imbecile. We should be talking first and deciding, why don't you just set the one corner there and I'll just reference in my plot that I found and accepted your corner. We can do that and we can get along. Ideally, what we want is something like this, that 120 years is found and everyone accepts as indisputable, and that's the corner, and we know that that's the corner, and we found it where it should be, and it's well marked and well monumented and well preserved, and now that we found it, we don't have any more questions and we can move on. This is ideally what we want. This looks like a problem. An old fence that looks decades old and a relatively new fence that's built parallel with and about 10 feet apart. This, I guarantee, is from a surveyor. Look at that. There's the same fence with a survey monument there and another one right there. That's looking down it, and this is looking sideways. This is a problem that never existed until a surveyor got involved and said, well, the real corner is really right there. And these guys came along and built their fence. And now what do we do with this part right here? This is a problem that a surveyor created, not one that they solved. And we should have some best practices involved. That who do we ask and what do we do? And did the surveyor that set this one, did he not find this over here? Did he set his own? Which one of these came first? Those are some questions and things we should have set up so that we can avoid some problems and pitfalls. As surveyors, we want to avoid court and avoid conflict. We want to solve problems, resolve concerns. We don't want to create them. Some of our best practices will be avoid conflict, right? Talk to the landowners, work things out, and recognize that as professional surveyors, we do not have the authority to move someone's line or to dictate what they own. We offer a professional opinion as to what they own and where that line is based on credible evidence. It is absolutely possible that another high quality professional surveyor might come to a different opinion than you. It does not mean that he's a bad surveyor or that the neighbor's a jerk. It means that the two surveyors saw things from different points of view. In most cases, the surveyors can get together and talk about that, share information, and resolve it. If not, as professionals, we need to be able to figure out a way to be harmonious and not cause conflict. So some of our best practices might be avoiding conflict. And just being aware of what we're getting into. How many of you or the firms you work for actually get a scope of work or a contract in writing and are very specific with exactly what you've been asked to do on your project? Okay. 20 years ago, we met a lot of the clients on the ground at their property. We shook their hand. They let us through the gate. We talked about their dog, whatever. Now, especially in the last year, it's been an email and a phone call. And sometimes we don't ever meet the clients, or sometimes the clients live out of state, or it's rental property or farm ground. So it's important to be very clear with, do they need us to locate the well? Do they need topography and contours? Do we need to locate the driveway or the house? Is there going to be a site plan involved? Do they need points online? What if it's 1,000 feet over the hill? Can we just set the front corner, back corner? Do you need 2 points online? All that takes time, and you need to know that before you go out there, and they need to know what's expected of you. If you give them a plat when you're done and they thought you were going to write deeds for them and record the deeds and pay for the recording, and you weren't expecting that, that's conflict between you and your client. We should be really clear with what we've been engaged to, what they've hired us for, and what we're going to be doing. At this point right here, does anyone have any questions or anything they want to bring up and talk about a little bit? Yeah, go ahead, Hayden.
How much of your own personal business is boundary surveys, like we've been talking about? Is it the majority of what you do?
Yeah, 90%. We do annexation plats, and we do some topography and site plans and ALTA surveys, but by and large, it's boundary work.
I've just heard, I mean, opinions between surveyors is always so different, but some people feel like boundary surveys, you can't make enough money from them, and there are other options like going the engineering route. Do you think that that's a false statement?
Well, I think if you're doing boundary survey and you're not making enough money, you should probably raise your prices. That's what I think. There's and I've heard the same thing. There's jobs out there. There's clients to be made. I have never worked at a company that had a full-time licensed engineer. At one point, the company I worked for had 4 licensed surveyors, but we've never had a licensed engineer. We've always subbed out the engineering work, and there's plenty of boundary work or site plans or topography or ALTA surveys to go out there. There's also plenty of development and subdivision work and construction staking to go out there. And I've heard people talk about splitting the professions and saying, when you do construction, you should stick with construction. When you do boundary, you should stick with boundary. You have no business crossing over. I don't think that's true. If you feel comfortable doing construction surveys and staking center line of roads and red heads and stationing and offsets and slope staking, and you also feel comfortable breaking out a PLSS section and finding a center quarter and a 16th and finding a meander line and retracing a Provo City lot and block, if you can do it, you can do it. But you should only do what you're comfortable with. Are there other comments or questions? And again, I don't want to dictate necessarily what's right or what's wrong with surveyors. Different firms, engineering firms or surveying firms, they will have their own standards or best practices. Some firms will just say, those jobs are too small, we won't do them. Others will say those are too big, we won't do them. Those too far, we only work in these counties. If that's what the owner of your company has found, that's good. That works. But what we should dictate is there are ways to avoid problems. Maybe your way is not the same as mine, but there are ways to avoid problems, to proofread, to double check, to have some quality control, to make sure we have a good narrative, to know we're sticking with the industry best practices and standards, to know the law, to do our research, to gather good data, to act and look like professionals, to represent our profession. Those are some things that we can all kind of do and agree on. Now, how your business is run and what you consider to be late and what kind of late fees you add and how much money you ask for upfront, if you accept credit cards, all those things can be just how your business is run. But as far as being a professional and being a best practice of professional, we want to stay out of trouble and stay out of court and stay out of litigation. We want to leave a good taste in the mouth of our client so they come back and refer us. We want to resolve conflict and ease concerns and make a living. One of the duties of a surveyor talks about we're licensed because we can affect the public. When we stake something on the ground, our client and the adjoining landowner have a reason to expect that that was accurate, that it's precise, that it was reliable. So the state says, rightly so, that we should be licensed and have a certain area of expertise, experience, and education. What we want to do is live up to that. And even though the neighbor is not paying us, when the neighbor says, so is that my corner? Well, yeah, it is. It is. We can't, well, I don't know if that's your corner or not. You'll have to ask your own surveyor. It may or it may not be. And I don't really know where your property is. I hope we know where their property is. And I hope that the two properties are contiguous and harmonious. And those are the things we should know before we start offering those opinions and writing them and signing and sealing them on our plat. Now, having said that, making a mistake does not mean we're bad surveyors. And having a typo or having to write an affidavit or correct something, that happens. But doing bad surveys and giving bad work and having bad quality control, not understanding a basis of bearing, those are areas that can get us in trouble. Yeah, Tanner.
Sure, I have a question kind of going off of what Hayden said. I've talked to a lot of surveyors as well who just don't seem to think it's possible to be profitable with boundary work, and they kind of look at it as supplemental and, you know, work to keep people busy, which we've talked a lot in class about how across the board we need to be charging more for our surveys. But I'm curious as to kind of like what your cost breakdown looks like. Do you charge a set amount for a record of survey and charge by the hour? Or I'm just curious as, you know, how some other companies do it, and specifically somebody that does a lot of boundary work charges for a boundary survey.
I just look at whatever my wife's credit card bill was that month and split it into three and say that's what all my surveys this month are going to cost. You can't do it by the job, because to do a Spanish fork or a Payson lot and block retracement is different than doing a survey of a subdivision approved in 2012 in Eagle Mountain. And both of those are different than doing a survey out in Camas or Oakley or Heber in the unincorporated area for a 40-acre farm. So they're all a little different, which is why I typically can't give someone a quote on the phone. I want to look at a deed. I want to drive by their property. I want to do a little bit of research. I want to see if I've done any work in that neighborhood or that area. Maybe someone else has recently. If it's in Utah County, it's a pretty good chance I can find the section corner. if it's in Wasatch or Summit or Juab or San Pete, I might not find a brass cap section corner in 4 miles. I might be looking for a stone or a fence corner or a calculated position, and they might not have tie sheets. So I think you've got to, again, do some research. And if you're not comfortable with it and you think you're going to lose your shirt, maybe that's a job that you can pass on. I don't know how else to say that, but sometimes there's big engineering and construction projects that I don't feel comfortable bidding on and doing. And I just tell them that's just not something I can do. Or if I do it, it's going to have to be at time and materials. I don't know if it's going to be 20 hours or 30 hours. And those are huge differences, thousands of dollars. So a quote I gave Monday, I told the guy it's going to be at least $4,000, but I guarantee it's less than 10. That's a pretty wide open quote. But I said, hey, with what you're telling me, it's 5 parcels in 3 sections over 100 acres. I can't nail it down any tighter than that.
Is that one of your best practices, to give them a range? Do you feel like customers are pretty satisfied that you've given them a range of a price?
Well, yeah, but that's not a best practice range. From 4 to 10 grand, 6,000 is not a best practice.
Right.
$4,000 to 4,500, that works. 3,800 to $4,000, that works. I will tell you, if you tell someone, I don't know, $4,000, maybe 4,500, they will hear $4,000 and they will hold you to $4,000. They will always hear the lowest number, which is kind of why it's really nice to have it in an email or written down that you said, I will do this, and I will do this, and I will do this, and it will be this much. That's a much better practice, because then when they say, you told me $4,000, you can say, no, go look at the email. It says $4,000 to 4,500, depending on this. And I sent you a bill for 4,200, and right, it's in writing. That answers a lot of questions. But yeah, sometimes it's really hard, and you're kind of sticking your neck out to say, this is only going to be a $1,200 survey. Well, is it really? And if it's $1,800, are you still just going to bill them the 12 because that's what you told them? That's sometimes communicating with your client and knowing exactly what they're asking for helps. Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, those are some ideas that I've had, and some of those are just taken from my experience in surveying. Is ideally, when you're newly licensed or you're in school, we would love for you to get ahead of the curve by 10 or 12 or 15 years and skip over some of the mistakes or the learning experiences that we had. You can't overestimate the value of experience, and having surveyed for 20 or 30 years is great. But you don't need to make the mistakes that a 20 or 30-year veteran does just to say you've got their experience. You don't need to set a corner in the wrong spot and go down and pull it. And you don't need to forget to file a plat and have another surveyor call you on the carpet before you recognize we should file these once a month. It's good to have some best practices and maybe your own internal checklist of, did I do the research? Never trust your client's research. When they say, I've got a manila folder, I've got all the deeds, I've got the survey, I've got everything, I'll give it to you, I'll hold the rod for you, I just need to drive the cost down, I can't afford to pay that, I'll go to the county, I'll get the records. That's not one of my best practices. If I'm going to sign and stamp it, I want to go to the ground, I want to see the conduit, I want to see the utility pole, I want to see the section corner, and I want to do the research for my deeds. So we just have to be aware, and it's your name on the line. So don't be afraid to dictate timing or price, and don't accept someone else's terms as far as moving the deadline up a week or driving the price down $500. A few years ago, I had a client. I never did the work for him, but I had a guy on the phone say, well, I've really liked talking to you, but the other guy has a lower price. can you do it for his price? And I said, no, I'll do it for my price, or you can have him. And he said, I just didn't feel comfortable talking to him on the phone. I said, well, then pay me to do it. And he said, no, your price is too high. Well, at some point, you've got to draw the line in the sand and decide, am I going to do surveys really fast? Am I going to do them really accurate? Or am I going to do them really cheap? And I don't think you can do all of them. You can do fast surveys, and they can be fast and accurate. And sometimes you can do cheap surveys, and they can be cheap and accurate. We shouldn't use the term cheap. They should be less expensive and accurate. It depends on, did you just do that lot and block last summer and you know it all? Have you done 3 lots in that subdivision? You figured everything out? Did you just do a survey down the street and you've already got all the control in? What do you have? But we never want to be cutting corners or doing things on the down low or having someone else dictate. Just sign it, just stamp it, just get it recorded. It's not really going to matter. We'll fix it later. That's not a best practice. So one of the best practices we can have is getting a good education, whether that's the 2-year degree, the 4-year degree, continuing education, going to the statewide conferences, getting continuing education and professional development hours. But to stay up on that, to be involved in the UCLS, the professional society, clubs, to take part in learning experiences, to keep your skills at the top, to communicate with other surveyors regularly, to go to lunch with another surveyor, to get their opinion and feedback, to bounce things off someone else. That is absolutely one of the best practices you have, is to build a good network of surveyors and people in the industry and profession that you can use as a reference, not to get a job, but to be a sounding board for, does this sound reasonable? Would you do this? Can I defend this? Can I send you a plat? Can you look at it? Can we talk for 30 minutes? Others in the profession will be very good resources to have. So that's what I have. Hopefully that answers some question and might help you avoid a few pitfalls.
I don't know who else is going to chime in here, Kevin, but that was awesome. Thank you very much for all the good advice, good best practices stuff. We definitely agree on almost all that stuff there. In fact, pretty much everything, and it's included in classes. We covered over across several classes in the program here. So we're happy that we're really working in the best practices area of those practices like yourself, who are doing 90% of your work is in the boundary survey work. So we appreciate you being here. Does anybody else have any final questions there? And Katie, if you have some other comments there, jump in too with any club business.
I'm good. I think I said what I needed to. Thank you so much, Kevin.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me to come.
Samia, do you have anything? Samia, do you have anything?
No. Thank you so much. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for your time and your wise and suggestions and comments to our students. Always appreciated.
Sure. Hopefully I see some of them next month down in St. George, or maybe virtually. I don't know. Maybe they won't drive down, right?
Yeah, we never know. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you again, Kevin. We appreciate everything. There's some people are showing stuff in the chat there, thanking you for your efforts, and we appreciate it. Thanks again, and look forward to having you back. Next month. No, sorry, next year, or in the future. Appreciate it, Kevin. Thanks a lot.
Sure thing. Thanks.
Thank all of you for coming. Hope you got something good out of it, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Hi, Samia.
Bye. Hey, hi. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.